In your supplies, you will find pressed flowers, cyanotype paper, and acrylic paper. On the back, you will find directions on how to tint your cyanotype yellow or brown if you are so interested. When selecting botanicals that you might be finding to add to your collection, I recommend pressing them and making sure they are thoroughly dry before continuing with this process. Inside your package, you will find a black plastic bag with your cyanotype treated paper inside. These papers are sensitive to sunlight, so when you open them, make sure you do so indoors out of direct sun. It is sometimes helpful to also lay down a clear plastic sheet, such as the front of a frame, in order to prevent the wind from blowing your botanicals off of your paper. I also recommend you find something such as a book to lay your paper on, so that way it is easy for you to maneuver indoors and outdoors. We first start by selecting botanicals that we would like to place. When we take this outside, we are going to segment exposures. I chose 5-minute intervals, and we'll use a rock and a thick piece of paper or cardboard to move along the front of our image in order to get a contact print. If you place a plastic sheet on top of your paper, be aware of the edges, so that way you don't run into any issues with those edges appearing in your print. So when we take this outside, we want to also be aware of where we are going to be placing this whole piece. So we want to make sure it's in direct sunlight. On this side, I have already exposed for 5 minutes. This right here has just been exposed, and this is not exposed at all. And you can see that as it gets exposed, the paper will turn colors. In my front yard, I chose a location that would give you a good spot of sun for a good amount of time, because exposures can range up to 30 minutes or more for some of the denser pieces. Your exposure will be complete once your paper has turned from blue to a pale yellow or off-white. Taking this inside, we're going to go and rinse it in some water. One of the first things I recommend to take notice of is if you don't properly rinse it, your print, you will have some leftover deposits of salts. And the salts are blue, so you will have this stain. It's something to be aware of. Usually you can wipe it off your counter and wash your hands. It's not something that's permanent, but if you aren't careful and you get a lot of it somewhere, it could leave this cyanotype type of dye. I recommend using a tray of water. You can also use running water. When you remove your botanicals, you will notice that the exposed paper is pale and the botanicals have blocked the exposure of the sun rays. It'll take about 24 hours for the entire development process to take effect. You want to go ahead and turn on water just enough to go over the face of your print. And you'll see it start to develop, and you want to rinse your print until the water coming off of your print runs completely clear. This is a different type of cyanotype paper, so your paper may have a lot more yellow running off of it. Again, if you don't rinse it properly, you will see some deposits of salts, and that will leave a blue tint. So take the time to make sure you rinse the front and the back. This brand of paper only coats the front, so you don't really need to rinse the back, but your paper will be coated front and back. Make sure to just take some time to rinse it thoroughly. You can also use like a pan, a deep pan for baking. Put some water in it and agitate back and forth until the water runs clear. And so this is where we have our wet print ready to be dried. You can have a blotter's book option like I've shown you before, where I would recommend, if you do use this option, to just rinse your things very thoroughly so you don't have deposits of salts on your blotter's book. The tissue paper goes on the front of your photograph, and the thicker paper goes on the back of the photograph. And this option will allow you to store many prints at once. The way that I have sometimes also done is picked a rag that's already stained that you can lay flat, and then just cover over on top, pressing flat to make sure your print stays flat. If you do not have a towel or a rag available, you can also use paper towels. And I would lay a layer or two down. Make sure it is as dry as possible because you don't want salts to deposit everywhere. And just lay one sheet down and then your photograph, and then lay another sheet down, making sure your photograph is nice and even and you have enough space for another one. And in this fashion, you can kind of make a sandwich with a print and then another layer of tissues on top. Let your print dry, and like I said, for 24 hours it'll take before the final image appears. And this is what we have.